But indeed, it is a celebration of plants and the power that they have in the landscape to inspire us and to, I hope, create communities in which the many inhabitants of the garden, insects, birds, reptiles, amphibians, all the fun things. Not everyone gardens for reptiles and amphibians, but I do. So the gardens that I'll show, most of which are not mine, by the way, not designs of my own or my own personal garden. I will point out when I can take credit for one or the other of those. But I like to celebrate the work of gardeners all over the country, master gardeners, professional garden designers, all kinds of people that have inspired me and created environments that I find conducive and inviting. So we'll jump in, see if this thing will work. Yay. All right, well, I'm going to start with a little exploration of color, because one of the things that I love most about gardens and plants is the emotional response to them. And what I respond to as a gardener is color. And I think most of us are attracted and get interested in gardening because of color. There's always a hook for whatever our particular interests or sets of interests are. I'm an avid bird watcher as well as a gardener, and I always love the story that Roger Torrey Peterson used to tell about how he got interested in bird watching. And as a 9-year-old, he was walking in the woods and he saw a gray lump hanging on the side of a tree. And as he approached this and reached out to touch it, it burst into wing, and it was a flicker that was resting on the tree. And of course, from a gray lump, if you know a flicker, when it opens its wings, the beautiful color of the underside of the wings becomes apparent. And so that's really, for me, what I love about, not just about birds, but about the experience of nature and of gardens, is there's always that hidden color underneath when you burst into life. So, and I look for color everywhere. This is obviously a department store display, but there's a great book I want to recommend to you called Seeing Gardens, S-E-E-I-N-G Gardens. It's by Sam Abel, who you may know is a very accomplished photographer for books and magazines like National Geographic. He's done a lot of work. He lives in the community where I live, outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. And this book is amazing because in the book, he explores what a garden is, and it's not what we think of necessarily as a physical place. He sees a garden in everything, from a kerchief on a woman in Bosnia to an estate garden or something as beautiful as what we saw earlier today. All these things to him are gardens, so it's degrees of seeing a garden, and a garden is about an experience. So when I look at this, I see a garden. I see a representation of color and the presence of people to appreciate it. So for me, in a very odd way, I see a garden. Now you've probably seen this before, the color wheel. It's a scary thing that most designers love to talk about and then completely ignore when they start designing. But there's a lot of interest in this, and I just want to point out two things about the color wheel. Some of you may have read Pam Harper's wonderful books on color and design. She's a wonderful author of My Way in Virginia also. And basically she says if you're scared to death of color and you don't know where to begin, there's two easy rules. First of all, if you want harmony in color, then when you look at the color wheel, design with colors that are adjacent to one another on the color wheel. And you will maximize harmony and you can't go wrong. Because if you look in the red and blue range or the blue towards the green range, there's a nice harmony between them. If you like excitement in the garden, then design with colors that are opposite one another on the color wheel. I'm pretty much that opposite on the color wheel kind of guy myself, but both are important. But rather than study the color wheel, I'm much more interested in the emotional response to color versus the more scientific approach to color. Not to get too touchy-feely, but one thing I find interesting is the different responses and cultural contexts in which color comes to us. This is something I just grabbed off the internet that I thought was very interesting. The meanings and the causes of color response. So red is about fire, passion, importance, and also danger. The causes of this is that it raises your blood pressure. Red is a color that excites us emotionally, but it also excites the color receptors in our eyes, which is why we have a direct line to our emotions through our eyes. And red is a color that visually jumps out at you. That's why it's a symbol of danger. Orange is energy, change, movement, vitality. Kind of that beautiful limey green, happiness, hope, but also more and more a color of caution. Some of our signs, especially for school crossings and things like that, are in that chartreuse color because it's very bright, even in low light. We see it easily. We get into green, new beginnings, growth, harmony, and nature. Green is the color that most soothes the receptor sites in our eyes. So it's no surprise that when we see a beautiful verdant landscape, we just kind of go, ah, because it's very soothing. Blue is an interesting color, calmness, responsibility, but strength, and then that purple, that magical color that has so many things, romance, creativity, purple prose, overly passionate, sometimes veering into sappy. That red, red rose of Gertrude Stein, such an amazing color. It is a passionate color. It's a beautiful color. It's a rich color. It's also that danger color. Stop, our stop signs, right away. Visually, that color jumps out and it says to you, stop. The sign says it, and red flowers in the landscape say it also. Your eye goes straight to them, and it's fixed on them. Red is also a color of passion. Sometimes that says stop, sometimes it says go, depending on the passion, but also a hot color, that excitement. Red in the landscape is beautiful. How many of you paint things? You will see some paint, good. Glad to see other people paint things. Dead or alive, things should be painted in the garden. And that could be plants, walls, anything. Visually exciting. So here's a dead manzanita in a garden that the gardener said, well, it's gone but not forgotten. Blue is another color that's very, very important for us. Blue is the opposite of red. It's a color of calm, and it's also a color of distance. Visually, blue recedes from the eye instead of jumping forward like red. This is, of course, something all southern gardeners wish they could grow, and very few people in North America can. This is a Himalayan blue poppy, but probably one of the most exotic and amazing plants there is. But blue is a color with which we're very comfortable and very familiar. It's the color of the sky, and it gives us the color of the sky reflected in water. Of course, water isn't really blue, but it often appears so, and we can use that to our advantage. And when you freeze water, it also reflects that light and makes this beautiful blue color. And you know, indoors, you often will hear a blue room referred to as a cold room, because blue can be a cold color. But then we can heat things back up again, moving in yellows through orange and red, the two colors that make up orange. And orange is an amazing color too. It's a very visual color, it's a comfortable color, it's an arresting color, and very familiar to us. And when we translate that into plants, I think some of our most beautiful plants are in various shades, tints and tones of orange. Here, our native flame azalea, Rhododendron calendulaceae. So beautiful. And then there's that color that everyone ignores. When they say, I want color, they're not talking about this color. This is the color green. But of course, green is an amazing color. As I mentioned, it's the most soothing visually to us. It calms our eyes. It gives us that let down. It's also a very popular color by name now as we talk about green technologies, green building, green industries. We're really using that green, the one green world symbol, of course, for recycling and sustainability. It's becoming a buzzword. Green is also an interesting color because we can be green with envy as well, which I love. Being a chlorophyll addict, green envy is something I adore. And green, of course, is not a color. It is a myriad of colors. And the names are wonderful. Myrtle and moss green and shamrock green. They're very evocative names to our colors of green. And here's some Prismacolor pencils that show the diversity that we saw in that first slide of green. Now when we start to put colors together, I mentioned I tend to like those colors that are opposite one another on the color wheel, because I like gardens that are exciting. And here's a blue and orange used together. Now, an interesting thing about colors also is if you stare at a particular color and then close your eyes, the color memory of that color is often its opposite or near opposite on the color wheel. So when you stare at something blue and close your eyes, you'll see an after image that's often in the orange range. So right away, again, our eye receptors play these fun tricks on us that can be very important in garden design. This is an artist installation of an art show up in Montreal a number of years ago. But again, seeing gardens. Is this a garden? Yes, I think it is. Here's those same colors used in something we might recognize more as a garden. This is Nancy Goldwyn, a crazy gardener out in Oregon who likes to play. We'll see a few different images from her garden through the talk. And here the oranges are toned down, almost to browny oranges, and the blue is put out towards more of an azure color. And even the bench, really almost a brown, to completely browned out orange. And then look at the center of the lily flower, it's that same color. Back to this idea that Pam Harper wrote about so beautifully in her book, Color Echoes. Really pulling the color scheme together, looking at all the details in the garden to support where you're going. Color is all around us, and as we start to put gardens together, what are the sources of that color and the other interesting aspects that we bring into the garden? This was a night in a bar in Minneapolis after one too many martinis, and I had this new little camera, and I was really playing with it. And I started taking pictures of this. This is actually the Guthrie Theater, the new Guthrie out there, if you're familiar with Minneapolis. And so I was playing, I got home and downloaded these pictures. I was like, wow. But they turned out to be pretty interesting, and I've used quite a number of them because they're really evocative of color and movement in the landscape. Petunias, this is one of those new ones you may love or hate, but flowers are probably our #1 source of color that we think about. We think about the flower and the color that it gives to the garden and the impact of that. Most of us are looking for color year-round, right? We want to wake up the first day of January and see color all the way till the last sunset on December 31st. And we can do that, but it's not always going to be the color that you think of. And I love some annuals from time to time. I think they have a wonderful place. But to me, the rhythm of the garden that fascinates me the most is when the flowers come and go. And there's a beauty for me in the rise and the opening, but also in the dropping of the flowers. And if the whole garden was like this all year long, we'd probably all go insane. We'd probably have a million mass murderers out there because it's too much. It keeps us stimulated all the time. We never rest. We might be more productive, or maybe not. We might just burn out. So the green, that respite, is such an important part of the experience of landscape. Here's a beautiful native wildflower, the yellow ladyslipper, another source of color. This is much more ephemeral color, and it's precious. You don't paint a landscape with 100 of these. You may have one choice clump, very different from the way we might use petunias. Color also comes to us from foliage. This is, I think its new name is Farfugium japonicum. It used to have another name. But this is one of the big leaf forms of what we normally grow as the leopard plant, which is spotted. Very beautiful plant. Hostas, great sources of color. Just about any color that you like, from plain green to almost pure white or yellow, all the different variations in there giving us great color. Foliage gives us much more consistent color than flowers do in the garden, especially in the shade, because many shade-loving plants are very ephemeral. But the foliage is with us all through the season, and sometimes all through the winter as well, with plants like Black Mondo that are evergreen. And one of the greatest color gifts that we have of all is right at this time of year, when the trees color above us, the shrubs, all those things come off, and ultimately they fall. That's what I love. If the plants colored and stayed on the tree all year, we'd be bored to death with them, wouldn't we? We also had berries this time of year to appreciate. So berries are a great source of color. Some berries persist through the autumn and right through the winter till spring. Other times they're on for just a short time before the birds nab them, or they drop with frost, depending on the plant. This is the Ilex decidua, beautiful native large shrub to small tree. Different dogwoods or cornus species with their beautiful winter twigs. This is Cornus midwinter fire, really beautiful European cornus, but we have some nice natives as well. Cornus amomum is probably the best one for us in the south. It does the best with our heat. But the red twig dogwood, Cornus sericea or stolonifera, is sold a lot in nurseries, but it doesn't really do well where the summers get hot. So Cornus amomum is a little better for us. Structures are also a great source of color. Here's a beautiful little courtyard garden down in Baton Rouge, where the door, the ribbon, and the shutters all bring the color through the garden. Walls in general can be great sources of color. Here, mimicking the same color. Instead of contrasting here, there's great harmony between green on green, which is beautiful. The opposite of that, a garden out in Los Angeles, where the wall is really meant to stun. put your gun on stun. Little and Lewis, great garden sculptors out in Portland, Oregon, or actually on Bainbridge Island outside of Seattle, not Portland, sorry. And their garden gallery is where they display their work. They're cement artists. So here, their purple wall and their beautiful work displayed. Chicago Botanic Garden and the Japanese garden there, and some kind of punctuation of breaking through that wall to create that revealment that's been talked about so much today, and how important that is. Just a little glimpse until you actually enter the space. A little teaser. A garden also out in Seattle. I love this garden. More gargoyles. You see, we didn't know this would be a gargoyle day, did we, from start to finish? But here's some wonderful gargoyles around a seating area. And instead of walling this in, it's just the columns. It's a suggestion of walls. And then the furniture, everything adding together. Furniture can be a great source of sculpture in the garden, be it very weathered like this, or colorful as a painted chair. This is my own garden, and one of the spaces there in the woods. Very, very simple. My garden is all about the wildness around me with minimal intervention, but definitely spaces for people. I call this place the Feng Shui Palace, and it's a pretty magical little spot. Back to Nancy Goldman's garden, where everything is fair game for planting in Nancy's garden. You don't sit too long in Nancy's garden, you'll end up with a plant in your lap. But she has a lot of fun, and high heels make great planters, who knew? More obvious art, anyone have a gazing ball in their garden? Oh good, lots of admissions. It used to be if you'd ask that at a symposium, everybody's, oh no, not me. No, I don't have any gazing balls. No, that's tacky. But we've been freed from that, and now we can admit it. Here's a ball for your garden. It takes big balls to have a good garden, and this one is really big. So, this is a garden in North Carolina, and this is a large space, so this is very much in scale, and it's beautiful. It sits way away from the house out in the meadow, and it's spectacular. At a garden on the West Coast, again, a moon gate, but in a very different way, a very organic moon gate, with just a little glimpse to the woods beyond. A garden I absolutely love, also outside of Seattle. This is a garden of Bob Fairfax. He's an amazing sculptor. He makes creatures out of cast resin that are modeled after microscopic prehistoric organisms that he gets under an electron microscope to find the form, and then he blows them up and casts them in resin. So this little guy up here is one of his creatures, and then these are some of his paintings on his pillar. His garden is all green. It's all about ferns and moss. It's in the Northwest, except for the sculptures. And the only non-green color in the garden is the sculptures. It's an amazing experience of the woodland. Flamingos. I don't know if we get flocked down here, but up where we live, if you're really lucky, your friends flock you. And so you wake up one morning and you've got some flamingos. Unfortunately, they usually don't let you keep them. You have to give them back, which is really not fair. Paving is another source of interest within that garden. We saw earlier many different patterns and uses of paving on terraces and around swimming pools, and how incredibly important that is to the whole experience of the garden. And here's just a real simple pebble mosaic. An artist out on the West Coast, a snake path. They often say the pathway snakes through the garden, and this one literally does. They just love this. And those beady chartreuse eyes, which is wonderful. A little more on the tasteful, or at least more restrained side, a broken paver planted with thymes. Very beautiful. Water is also a great source of interest. It reflects the sky. You can see the clouds moving across at the level of the ground. Of course, swimming pools and other large features do it, but these pools work also as well, and they're a little less expensive to install. At Chanticleer, an amazing garden in Wayne, Pennsylvania, an old estate. This is the ruin garden. Has anyone visited Chanticleer? It's an incredible experience. It's called Chanticleer, a pleasure garden, and it is all about the pleasure, the sensual pleasure of experience of plants and form. And this ruin, the idea behind it was when they tore the house down, they would leave a few walls and create a ruin garden, much as they do in Europe, especially in Italy and other places. But as they tore the house down, the walls became too unstable. So they took the whole thing down and then built a ruin. So it's quite amazing. And this is the dining room, and the dining room table is a black marble sarcophagus with a very thin film of water over the top. So a little bit of the macabre in this beautiful space. Quite a wonderful garden if you get a chance to get up towards Philadelphia way. This is another garden I love where water is used in a very different way to interplay with light. This is Innisfree Garden up in the Hudson River Valley above New York City. And this is just a little rock outcropping with a mist nozzle. And how incredibly simple and beautiful that is when the light plays behind it. So, when we start to then put those things on top of the layers of an ecological landscape, especially when we talk about gardening in the shade, we're usually talking about some kind of canopy cover, whether it's planted or existing canopy under which we're gardening. So we need to look at the layers that nature hands us as great tools for garden building. The highest, of course, is the canopy. This is the tulip poplar forest. We were seeing earlier around Biltmore how important the tulip poplar as an icon of the Southern Appalachians was for Biltmore itself. And here along the Blue Ridge Parkway, up near where I live, a young forest of tulip poplar. And here's a garden up in Northern Virginia where the canopy is very much embraced, the decking, very kind of 70s way of approaching landscape design to build the deck right around the tree. But look how important the canopy is, and you're actually elevated above ground level so that you're within the canopy. This is a beautiful little garden outside of Washington, D.C. This is the Mount Cuba Center and the understory of dogwood trees under those tall canopy trees. Earlier, Tom was talking about that middle layer and how important that was for enclosure and revealing views underneath, and those understory trees do that for us. Here in a garden, a combination of evergreen and deciduous understory trees up against the house and spread across the landscape. And then finally, that shrub layer. This is where we really start to have fun with the flowering shrubs. So many beautiful plants that we can grow here. This is our native Pinkster Bloom azalea, and how great that is, and how tightly these plants layer together. Now, this is nature, but we can put plants this close together in a garden and create beautiful effects. Oftentimes there's a lot of evergreen, depending on the location and the soils in this layer as well. And then the ground layer, where when we love perennials, we paint with color and texture and form across the landscape. This is the nose of a little ancient weathered bluff on the Mississippi River up in Minnesota, and that pink color is actually shooting star, a really beautiful little wildflower if you know it. There's that green, that see, immediately you just go It's so soothing, the green color. And for me, this is just, if I had no garden other than this, I'd be a happy gardener because it's so beautiful. I wish I had the restraint to create something this simple. I don't. And nature often paints at the ground layer in huge sweeps, but sometimes it's very judicious with individual plants and makes much more of a mosaic. This is Virginia bluebell, Mertensia virginica, in a floodplain. And oftentimes in sites like floodplains, plants grow in great profusion and very beautiful. This is a very ephemeral moment, however. And after a week and a half or 2 weeks of this color,